Tribe of Mentors by Timothy Ferriss is a self-improvement book built on a very simple but powerful idea. Instead of trying to figure everything out alone, why not learn from the best questions and answers of extraordinary people? Ferriss gathered advice from top performers across many fields, including business, sports, investing, writing, psychology, entertainment, and public life. The result is not a single argument or one grand theory. It is more like a carefully assembled advisory board in book form. That is what makes this book so useful. Ferriss does not present himself as the sole expert. Instead, he asks smart, repeatable questions to many accomplished people and lets their answers reveal patterns. He is not only interested in success stories. He wants the routines, beliefs, habits, mistakes, and mental models that helped these people navigate life. In other words, he is trying to uncover how thoughtful people think when the spotlight is off and the real decisions begin. This gives the book a very different energy from most self-improvement books. It feels less like a lecture and more like a conversation. You are not being told there is one perfect system for everyone. You are being invited to listen to many strong minds and notice what ideas keep returning. Some people emphasize sleep. Some emphasize saying no. Some prioritize meditation, writing, therapy, exercise, or journaling. Some value resilience, some value clarity, and some value courage. The advice varies, but the patterns become impossible to ignore. What Ferriss seems to understand is that many people do not necessarily need more information. They need better questions. They need sharper ways to think about fear, decision-making, meaning, priorities, and the design of everyday life. A strong question can unlock more than 100 vague tips. This is especially important because modern life overwhelms people with noise. Endless content, opinions, trends, and distractions make it harder to think deeply. Tribe of Mentors cuts through some of that by offering distilled insight from people who have already lived through failure, pressure, reinvention, and success. At its core, this book is about borrowed wisdom. It gives the reader access to life lessons that might otherwise take decades to learn through personal trial and error. And once you realize how much can be gained from asking better questions and listening carefully to experienced people, you begin to see why Ferriss built the book this way. It is not just a collection of interviews. It is a shortcut to perspective. One of the most important lessons in Tribe of Mentors is that the quality of your questions often shapes the quality of your life. Ferriss builds the entire book around this insight. Rather than asking vague or predictable interview questions, he asks very specific questions that force clarity. Questions like, what is the book you have given most as a gift? What failures set you up for later success? What habits or routines have improved your life the most? What advice would you give to a younger version of yourself? These kinds of questions matter because they pull people beyond image and into reflection. Instead of simply talking about achievements, Ferriss's guests talk about turning points, mistakes, disciplines, recovery, fear, and lessons that lasted. That makes the book far more useful than a simple collection of success stories. Ferriss seems to understand that many people stay stuck not because they lack effort, but because they keep asking shallow questions. They ask, how do I get more done, instead of asking, what actually matters? They ask, how do I avoid discomfort, instead of asking, what discomfort is necessary for growth? They ask, what should I do next, instead of asking, what patterns in my life need to change? A better question creates a better frame. Once the frame improves, the mind starts looking for deeper answers. This is why Tribe of Mentors can feel more mentally stimulating than books that simply hand out formulas. It trains the reader to think in a more useful way. The power of questions also lies in their repeatability. Ferriss is not just collecting answers. He is giving readers a set of questions they can ask themselves, their mentors, their friends, or even journal about privately. That turns the book into a tool rather than just a reading experience. This is one of the reasons the book stays relevant. Advice changes with time, but good questions remain powerful. They help you adapt. They help you notice what you have been avoiding. They help you understand your own values more clearly. The deeper lesson here is that wisdom often begins with inquiry. The people Ferriss interviews are not all alike, but many of them have clearly spent years asking hard questions about life, work, health, relationships, and meaning. That habit appears to be part of what made them strong. So one of the biggest gifts of this book is not just what the mentors say. It is the example Ferriss sets in how he asks. Because once you learn to ask better questions, you begin to think better. And when thinking improves, decisions tend to improve too. One of the most valuable things about Tribe of Mentors is that it quietly breaks the illusion that there is one perfect formula for success. Because the book contains advice from so many different people, the reader quickly notices that high performers do not all live the same way. Some wake up early, while others do not. Some meditate daily, while others focus more on exercise or writing. Some work intensely in short bursts, while others rely on long periods of concentration. Some are highly structured, while others are looser and more intuitive. This is a crucial lesson. Many people waste time searching for the perfect routine, the perfect morning, the perfect productivity system, or the perfect mindset. Ferriss's book suggests a healthier approach. There are many ways to build a good life, but there are also recurring principles. The trick is not to copy one person exactly. The trick is to notice what kinds of practices tend to support strength, clarity, resilience, and good decisions. This makes the book more humane. It reduces the pressure to imitate someone else's personality or schedule. You do not need to become a replica of a famous investor, athlete, author, or entrepreneur. You need to become more skillful at building a life that works for your values, your temperament, and your goals. Ferriss seems very aware of this. He does not present the book as a strict manual. He presents it as a collection of tested ideas that can be adapted. That flexibility is one of its biggest strengths. At the same time, the book does not fall into complete relativism. It is not saying everything works equally well. Certain themes appear again and again for a reason. Reflection matters. Recovery matters. Focus matters. Boundaries matter. Good habits matter. Courage matters. Learning from failure matters. So while the exact forms differ, the deeper principles remain surprisingly consistent. This combination of variation and pattern is what makes the book so useful. It allows readers to feel both free and guided. Free because there is no single mold they must fit into. Guided because the repeated lessons point toward real wisdom. This is especially helpful for people who feel overwhelmed by self-improvement culture. Instead of demanding instant transformation, Ferriss's collection invites experimentation. Try a few strong ideas. Observe what changes. Keep what works. Adjust what does not. The book's message here is subtle but powerful. You do not need a perfect formula. You need a better toolkit, stronger awareness, and the willingness to build your own version of a meaningful life. As Ferriss interviews one high performer after another, one pattern becomes clear. Daily life matters more than dramatic goals. The routines people return to, the habits they protect, and the way they structure ordinary days often shape long-term success far more than occasional bursts of motivation. This is why morning routines, sleep habits, exercise, journaling, meditation, reading, and other repeated practices show up so often in the book. Ferriss is interested in the architecture of daily life. He wants to know how people position themselves to think clearly, work well, and stay emotionally steady. The exact routines vary, but the logic is similar. A strong routine reduces friction. It creates stability before the day becomes chaotic. It protects important actions from being crowded out by distraction. And it helps people avoid relying entirely on mood or willpower. This matters because many people think improvement is about occasional intensity. They wait to feel inspired, energized, or fully ready. But Ferriss's mentors often reveal a different path. Progress usually comes from repeated behaviors that are simple enough to sustain and strong enough to compound over time. The book also highlights that routine is not the enemy of freedom. In fact, the right routine often creates more freedom by reducing disorder. If the body is rested, if the mind is clearer, if the morning begins intentionally, then the rest of the day becomes easier to handle. Small habits create a stronger base. Another important insight is that habits reflect values. If someone consistently protects sleep, reflection, movement, or focused work, they are showing what they consider important. Ferriss's interviews suggest that many successful people do not leave the essentials of life to chance. They build them into their calendar and identity. This is useful for the reader because it turns success into something more concrete. It is no longer just about ambition or talent. It becomes about repeatable structure. What do you do every day that supports the person you want to become? Ferriss does not insist that everyone adopt one specific routine. But he clearly believes that high-quality days create high-quality lives. And the more intentionally a person designs their day, the more likely they are to create calm, focus, and momentum. The lesson here is simple and strong. Big results are often built through the invisible architecture of small, repeated choices. A major strength of Tribe of Mentors is that it does not only showcase polished success. Ferriss deliberately asks about failures, painful experiences, and times when things went badly. This gives the book emotional credibility because it shows that growth usually does not happen in a straight line. Many of the most valuable answers in the book come when people describe a mistake, a crisis, a disappointment, or a period of confusion that later became important. These stories matter because they show that pain is not always a dead end. Sometimes it becomes a turning point. Sometimes the failure that looked destructive at first ends up revealing a weakness that needed correction, a path that needed to change, or a strength that had not yet been developed. Ferriss seems deeply interested in this because modern success culture often hides the messy middle. People see the result, but not the rejection, embarrassment, doubt, or breakdown that came before it. Tribe of Mentors pushes back against that illusion. It shows that many admired people were shaped through difficulty. This makes the book more useful because it changes how readers may interpret their own setbacks. Instead of seeing every failure as proof of inadequacy, they can begin asking different questions. What is this experience teaching me? What assumption did it expose? What behavior needs to change? What strength is this forcing me to build? This does not mean pain is automatically helpful. Ferriss's guests do not romanticize suffering, but many of them show that when failure is reflected on honestly, it can become valuable. It can strip away ego, sharpen judgment, and redirect life in a wiser direction. Another important pattern is that resilient people tend to separate identity from outcome. They may fail at something, but they do not let that single event define their entire sense of self. That emotional skill makes recovery much faster and growth much more likely. This section of the book can be deeply reassuring for viewers who are in a difficult season. It reminds them that many strong lives were built through periods that once felt uncertain and discouraging. What matters is not only what happened. What matters is what was learned and how the person responded. Ferriss's larger message is that wisdom is often expensive. But if you are willing to study your setbacks instead of merely surviving them, the price can eventually produce something meaningful. In that sense, one of the greatest mentors in the book is failure itself, if you are willing to listen. Another major theme in Tribe of Mentors is fear. Ferriss repeatedly asks questions that force people to talk about fear, difficult decisions, and moments when they had to act without certainty. This matters because fear is one of the biggest invisible forces shaping everyday life. It affects what people say yes to, what they avoid, what they postpone, and how small they allow their life to become. Many of Ferriss's mentors do not claim to be fearless. What stands out is that they have developed a more functional relationship with fear. They expect discomfort. They understand that uncertainty is part of growth. and they often seem willing to take action before they feel fully ready. This is a crucial lesson because many people wait for the feeling of confidence before making important changes. But confidence often arrives after action, not before it. The willingness to enter discomfort is often what opens the next stage of life. Ferris seems especially interested in how people think during these moments. How do they evaluate risk? How do they distinguish real danger from imagined disaster? How do they stop fear from controlling the future? These are practical questions, not abstract ones. The answers vary, but some common patterns appear. Break the fear into smaller parts. Ask what the worst-case scenario really is. Consider whether the consequences are reversible. Notice how often the cost of inaction is ignored. Many people are so afraid of trying something difficult that they never calculate the long-term cost of staying stuck. This is one of the most powerful insights in the book. Avoiding risk feels safe in the short term, but over time it may create regret, stagnation, and missed possibility. Ferris wants the reader to see that the comfort zone has a cost too. The book also suggests that courage is not necessarily dramatic. Sometimes it is a quiet act, ending a wrong path, starting a hard conversation, admitting confusion, asking for help, trying again after failure, or finally pursuing something meaningful. These small acts of courage often have huge consequences later. What makes this theme so important is that self-improvement is not only about habits and routines. It is also about decisions. And many of the best decisions in life are uncomfortable before they are rewarding. Ferris's deeper lesson is that fear will always be present in some form. The question is whether you will organize your life around avoiding it, or whether you will learn how to move with it and beyond it. Ferris often asks his mentors about books, teachers, favorite gifts, and the sources of ideas that changed their lives. This reveals another strong pattern in the book. Many exceptional people are serious learners. They may learn through books, mentors, conversations, reflection, therapy, experience, or spiritual practice, but they rarely assume they already know enough. This matters because growth depends heavily on what enters the mind. The people in Tribe of Mentors often seem selective about their influences. They do not just consume random information. They seek material that sharpens thought, challenges assumptions, and expands perspective. Reading in particular shows up as a major force. A well-timed book can reframe a problem, expose a blind spot, or provide a new mental model that changes future decisions. Ferris's own method in this book reflects the same belief. Why waste years learning every lesson personally if you can absorb part of that wisdom from others who have already walked the road? This is not about passively collecting quotes. It is about active borrowing. You take an idea, test it, think with it, and use it. That is how borrowed wisdom becomes practical rather than decorative. The book also reminds the reader that learning is not only technical. Many of Ferris's guests recommend philosophy, psychology, spiritual texts, biography, memoir, and fiction. This broader kind of learning matters because a strong life requires more than information. It requires judgment, perspective, emotional intelligence, and the ability to understand people. Another useful lesson here is humility. People who keep learning usually remain more flexible. They are less trapped by ego and more open to correction. That openness tends to improve decisions because life keeps changing and a rigid mind often falls behind reality. Ferris seems to believe that every person needs a tribe of intellectual influences, a set of voices that strengthen them. These voices may come from books, mentors, friends, thinkers, or carefully chosen communities. What matters is that they pull you upward rather than leaving you trapped in shallow thinking. This part of the book is especially valuable for viewers building a self-improvement path. It reminds them that they do not need to invent everything from zero. They can accelerate growth by learning from high-quality sources and returning to the ideas that continue to produce clarity. The message here is simple. A better life is often built with borrowed wisdom, thoughtfully applied. Across Tribe of Mentors, Ferriss repeatedly returns to the subject of health. This is not surprising because many top performers understand something that ordinary productivity culture often forgets. The mind does not operate separately from the body. Energy, sleep, movement, recovery, and stress regulation affect almost every important area of life. This lesson matters because many people pursue ambition while neglecting the base that supports ambition. They work harder, sleep less, eat poorly, skip movement, and assume they can continue operating at a high level indefinitely. But Ferriss's mentors often show the opposite pattern. They protect their physical state because they know it affects mood, focus, resilience, and judgment. Some people in the book rely on specific workouts. Others focus on simple walking, mobility, martial arts, yoga, or strength training. Some care deeply about diet. Others focus more on recovery and sleep. The exact methods differ, but the principle is steady. Performance is easier when the body is being maintained rather than ignored. This is a useful correction to a common mistake in self-improvement. People often chase advanced mental strategies while their basic energy system is unstable. Ferriss's interviews suggest that before optimizing life at a high level, many people would benefit from improving sleep, movement, recovery, and physical consistency. The book also hints at something deeper. Caring for the body is not only about output. It is also about self-respect and sustainability. A life built on constant exhaustion eventually becomes brittle. A life supported by recovery becomes more durable. What is striking is that even highly ambitious people in the book often respect rest. They understand that rest is not laziness. It is renewal. Recovery is what makes strong effort repeatable. This section gives the book practical weight because it reminds readers that better thinking often begins with better physiology. When the body is calmer, stronger, or more rested, emotions become easier to regulate and attention becomes easier to direct. Ferriss seems very aware that many problems people call mental or motivational are partly physical. Sleep deprivation, chronic stress, poor recovery, and inconsistent energy can distort the whole experience of life. The lesson here is clear. If you want better habits, better focus, and better decisions, do not ignore the body. It is not separate from the mind. It is one of the foundations that makes the rest possible. One of the strongest recurring ideas in Tribe of Mentors is the power of saying no. This may sound simple, but it is one of the most practical forms of wisdom in the whole book. High performers often become strong not only because of what they do, but because of what they refuse. Ferriss's mentors frequently reveal that boundaries are essential. Without boundaries, attention gets scattered, schedules become crowded, and life slowly fills with other people's priorities. Saying yes to everything may look generous or ambitious, but in practice, it usually creates dilution. Important work weakens. Recovery disappears. Personal clarity gets lost. This is why saying no shows up so often among thoughtful people. They understand opportunity cost. Every commitment consumes time, energy, and mental space. A weak yes is often a hidden no to something more important. Ferriss clearly values this lesson because it applies everywhere. It applies to work, relationships, information, travel, business, creative projects, and even emotional drama. Not everything deserves access to your time. Not every invitation creates value. Not every obligation is wise. This idea also connects to self-respect. People who say no effectively often have a stronger sense of what matters to them. They are not making decisions only to avoid disappointing others. They are making decisions based on clarity. Of course, boundaries can feel uncomfortable at first. Many people are used to pleasing, reacting, or keeping too many options open. But Ferriss's interviews suggest that maturity often includes becoming more selective. The goal is not selfish isolation. The goal is intentional living. Another important point is that saying no makes room for depth. If too many commitments compete at once, meaningful work becomes harder. Real creativity, Focused effort, strong relationships, and genuine rest all need space. Boundaries create that space. This lesson is especially valuable in a world of constant access. Messages arrive instantly. Opportunities appear endlessly. Demands never fully stop. In that environment, no becomes a protective tool. It guards attention, identity, and direction. Ferris's deeper message is that a good life is often shaped through subtraction. Not by doing more of everything, but by clearing space for what truly deserves your best energy. That is why saying no is not a negative act. In the right context, it is one of the most positive decisions a person can make. Although Tribe of Mentors contains plenty of tactical advice, one of its deeper themes is meaning. Ferris is not only asking people how they optimize their mornings or increase performance. He is also asking questions that point toward values, purpose, and what makes life worth living. This gives the book more depth than a simple habits manual. Readers begin to notice that many high performers are not only disciplined. They are reflective. They have spent time thinking about what matters, what enough looks like, what they regret, and what kind of life they are trying to build. This matters because self-improvement without values can become shallow. A person may become more efficient, more productive, and more externally successful while still feeling empty if they never ask deeper questions. Why am I doing this? What do I want my life to stand for? Which relationships matter most? What am I sacrificing, and is it worth it? Ferris's mentors do not all give the same answers, but that is part of the value. The reader sees many different definitions of a good life. Some emphasize contribution. Some emphasize creativity. Some emphasize freedom. Some emphasize service, family, peace, or inner alignment. The variety itself is instructive because it shows that meaningful living is personal, but never accidental. This section of the book also suggests that wisdom is partly about reducing confusion. The more clearly a person understands their values, the easier it becomes to make decisions, set boundaries, and recover from distractions. Without values, everything feels equally urgent. With values, choices become more coherent. Ferris seems especially interested in mentors who have faced enough life to know what lasts and what does not. Their answers often carry a quieter tone than ordinary success advice. They speak less about chasing status and more about simplicity, peace, integrity, relationships, and doing work that matters. That shift is valuable for the reader because it keeps ambition connected to humanity. Success without meaning becomes unstable. Performance without values becomes exhausting. A better life usually requires both outer confidence and inner orientation. The lesson here is not that everyone should adopt the same philosophy. It is that every person eventually needs one. Some sense of what matters most. Some guiding values that can survive changing circumstances. In that way, Tribe of Mentors is not just about how to perform better. It is also about how to live more thoughtfully. One challenge of Tribe of Mentors is that it contains so many voices, so many ideas, and so many possible takeaways that a reader could easily become inspired, but also scattered. Ferris seems aware of this, which is why the best way to use the book is not to treat it as a rigid system or try to apply everything at once. The smarter approach is selective use. Read with attention, but also with restraint. Notice which ideas return repeatedly across different mentors. Notice which answers create a strong emotional reaction in you. Notice which questions expose something unresolved in your own life. Those are often the places where the book can help most. This matters because self-improvement can become another form of overload. People read too much, collect too many tools, and start too many habits at once. Then nothing becomes stable. Ferris's book is more useful when approached like a menu or a toolkit. Choose a few things. Test them seriously. Reflect on the results. Then continue. Another good approach is to use the questions personally. Instead of only admiring the answers from others, pause and answer the same questions yourself. What failure taught you the most? What book would you gift the most? What advice would you give your younger self? What habits make your life better? These reflections can turn the book from passive inspiration into active growth. The book also becomes more powerful when revisited over time. Different answers hit differently depending on your season of life. Something that feels irrelevant at one moment may become exactly what you need later. That makes Tribe of Mentors the kind of book that can mature with the reader. Ferris's larger contribution here is not simply giving advice. It is helping readers build a practice of reflection, borrowing, and adaptation. That practice can continue long after the book ends. This is why the book works best for people who are willing to be intentional. Not obsessive, not perfectionistic, but intentional. Try less, but try thoughtfully. Move from insight to experiment. Keep what strengthens your life. The main lesson is simple. You do not need every mentor's advice. You need the right advice, applied in the right way at the right time. And if you can learn to read the book with that kind of selectivity, it becomes far more useful than a one-time burst of motivation. At its heart, Tribe of Mentors is a book about accelerating wisdom. Timothy Ferriss's core message is that you do not have to learn every important lesson through slow, painful trial and error. You can borrow insight from people who have already lived through struggle, success, reinvention, and deep reflection. But to do that well, you need better questions, open attention, and the willingness to experiment with what you learn. The book shows that there is no single formula for a good life, but there are clear patterns. Thoughtful people tend to reflect regularly. They take health seriously. They value learning. They pay attention to fear. They build routines that support stability. They set boundaries. They recover from failure by studying it. And they keep asking what truly matters. Several major lessons stand out. First, the quality of your questions shapes the quality of your thinking. Second, daily habits matter because life is built through repetition. Third, failure often contains instruction if you are willing to examine it honestly. Fourth, fear should be investigated rather than blindly obeyed. Fifth, learning from others can save years of confusion. Sixth, saying no is often essential for saying yes to what really matters. And finally, meaning and values must guide improvement, or success may feel empty. What makes this book powerful is that it feels both broad and personal. Broad because it gathers wisdom from many fields and personalities. Personal because the questions touch life at a human level. Regret, courage, health, peace, focus, friendship, purpose, and failure are not niche topics. They matter to almost everyone. If you take one big idea from Tribe of Mentors, let it be this. Build your life with help. Ask better questions. Learn from people who have gone ahead. Borrow tested ideas. Reflect honestly. Then adapt what you learn into your own habits, values, and decisions. That is where the real power of mentorship lies. Not blind imitation, but wise borrowing. Not copying another life, but strengthening your own through other people's hard-earned clarity. And that is why this book stays valuable. It is not just a stack of answers. It is a training ground for better thinking, better self-understanding, and more intentional living.